Welcome to the channel. We're excited to explore ideas that shaped Western civilization and the world in this series. Our goal is a family-friendly vibe, though sensitive topics might pop up. As such, viewer discretion is advised. When guest speakers join us, we'll ask them to keep in line with our standards, but we can't promise that. Our aim is to break down concepts clearly and concisely without oversimplifying, and focus on discussion of ideas, not necessarily the promotion of them. Satire, nuance, and devil's advocate moments might arise, so context matters. The channel and its team don't officially back any views that are discussed. We'll adapt as we go, and we'd love your civil, constructive input. Check descriptions and comments for info. Our goal, to be open-minded, evolving, and exploratory. Thrilled to have you here.
Hello and welcome back to our read-along series. We are continuing our reading of Plato's Republic today. We're in book 2, and we're going to go back a couple paragraphs from where we left off. We were talking about justice and the seeming benefits of injustice, especially when you can just be unjust and then repent or get away with it or bribe the gods. And we'll pick up on what principle.
All right, I can start reading if you'd like.
Yeah, go for it.
I'll read this paragraph and then you can take the next one. He says, "On what principle then shall we any longer choose justice rather than the worst injustice, when, if we only unite the latter with the deceitful regard to appearances, shall we fare to our mind both with gods and men in life after death, as the most numerous and the highest authorities tell us? Knowing all this, Socrates, how can a man who has any superiority of mind, or person, or rank, or wealth, be willing to honor justice, or indeed refrain from laughing when he hears justice praised, even if there should be someone who is able to disprove the truth of my words, and who is satisfied that justice is best? Still he is not angry with the unjust, but is very ready to forgive them, because he also knows that men are not just of their own free will, unless, peradventure, there be someone with the divinity within him may have inspired with a hatred of injustice, or who has attained knowledge of the truth, but no other man. He only blames injustice who, owing to cowardice or age or some weakness, has not the power of being unjust. And this is proved by the fact that when he obtains the power, he immediately becomes unjust as far as he can be."
The cause of all this, Socrates, was indicated by us at the beginning of the argument, when my brother and I told you how astonished we were to find of all the professing panegyrists of justice, beginning with the ancient heroes of whom any memorial has been preserved to us, and ending with the men of our own time, no one has ever blamed injustice or praised justice except with a view to the glories, honors, and benefits which flow from them. No one has ever adequately described either in verse or prose the true essential nature of either of them abiding in the soul, and invisible to any human or divine eye, or shown that of all the things of a man's soul which he has within him, justice is the greatest good, and injustice the greatest evil. Had this been the universal strain, had you sought to persuade us of this from our youth upwards, we should not have been on the watch to keep one another from doing wrong, but every one would have been his own watchman, because afraid, if he did wrong, of harboring in himself the greatest of evils. I dare say that Thrasymachus and others would seriously hold the language which I have been merely repeating, and words even stronger than these about justice and injustice, grossly, as I conceive, perverting their true nature. But I speak in this vehement manner, as I must frankly confess to you, because I want to hear from you the opposite side, and I would ask you to show not only the superiority which justice has over injustice, but what effect they have on the possessor of them, which makes the one to be good and the other an evil to him. And please, as Glaucon requested of you, to exclude reputations. For unless you take away from each of them his true reputation and add on the false, we shall say that you do not praise justice, but the appearance of it. We shall think that you are only exhorting us to keep injustice dark, and that you really agree with Thrasymachus in thinking that justice is another's good and the interest of the stronger, and that injustice is a man's own profit and interest, though injurious to the weaker. Now, as you have admitted that justice is one of that highest class of goods which are desired indeed for their results, but in a far greater degree for their own sakes, like sight or hearing or knowledge or health, or any other real and natural and not merely conventional good, I would ask you, in your praise of justice, to regard one point only. I mean the essential good and evil which justice and injustice work in the possessors of. Let others praise justice and censure injustice, magnifying the rewards and honors of the one and abusing the other. That is a manner of arguing which, coming from them, I am ready to tolerate. But from you, who have spent your whole life in the consideration of this question, unless I hear the contrary from your own lips, I expect something better. And therefore I say, not only prove to us that justice is better than injustice, but show what either of them do to the possessor of them, which makes the one to be a good and the other an evil, whether seen or unseen by gods and men.
I think this last sentence is fairly important going forward, just because it sort of explains what what he expects of his I guess his partner in this conversation. Uh, that being
Mhm.
to prove that injustice is better than, or that justice is better than injustice. Um, and whether one is good and the other is evil. Uh, but yeah, this there's a lot of stuff um, to I guess parse in this uh, in these two paragraphs just from the size alone.
Mhm. I guess the real point he's trying to get at is about the seeming phenomenon of people being a bit hypocritical or yeah, kind of fake or contrary to what they propose. Like people saying that they propose justice and they value it and would encourage it, but also not really being against injustice, both because, they would be evil if they had power, but also that they don't really speak against evils or injustice as much as they should.
And
That
keeping
there's,
injustices,
yeah,
as he says, in the dark as well.
yeah. Yeah, so now there's the challenge that if you're judging justice and injustice by their fruits, that's one discussion, but he's saying, well, what is in their nature that makes them good and evil? Because if you're just talking about their fruits, then injustice is fine for you to do as long as you don't get caught. Like, it'll be more beneficial for you to be unjust as long as you keep it dark. So if you really want justice and you really argue for it, it has to be on its own merits.
And I think this line, or these couple lines right here, are important, or mostly this word, essential. And I think in my reading of it, it seems like he's using essential in like the philosophical sense. I guess the
Like,
Platonic sense of
yeah, the
what
essence of the
makes,
thing, not like it's.
yeah, like what makes it up, like what is, you could say, predicable to it. Eh. But yeah, as he mentions explicitly or implicitly, he hasn't gotten any sort of response to his original question of whether or not um, justice is a good thing or injustice is a bad thing, and vice versa. I can continue reading unless you have any other thoughts
Go
before
for
we get into the weeds or into the good stuff. So yeah, he says, I had always admired the genius of Glaucon and Adeimantus, but on hearing these words I was quite delighted, and said, Sons of the illustrious father, that was not a bad beginning of the elegiac, elegiac verses which the admirer of Glaucon made in honor of you after you had distinguished yourselves in the battle of Megara. Sons of Ariston, he sang, divine offspring of an illustrious hero. The epithet is very appropriate, for there is something truly divine in being able to argue as you have for the superiority of injustice, and remaining unconvinced by your own arguments. And I do believe you that, that you are not convinced. This I infer from your general character, for had I judged only from your speeches, I should have mistrusted you. But my difficulty is in knowing what to say, for I am in a strait between two, in a rock, in a hard place, so to speak. On the one hand, I feel that I am truly unequal to the task, and my inability is brought home to me by the fact that you are not satisfied with the answer which I made to Thrasymachus, proving, as I thought, the superiority which justice has over injustice, and yet I cannot refuse to help, with while breath and speech remain to me. I am afraid that there would be an impiety in being present when justice is evil spoken of, and not lifting up a hand in her defense, and therefore I had best give such help as I can. Glaucon and the rest entreated me to all means, by all means, not to let the question drop, but to proceed in the investigation. They wanted to arrive at the truth, first, about the nature of justice and injustice, and secondly, about their relative advantages. I told them what I really thought, and the inquiry would be of a serious nature and would require very good eyes. Seeing then that we are no great wits, that's funny, I think that we had better adopt a method which I may illustrate thus. Suppose a short sighted person had been asked by someone to read small letters from a distance, and it occurred to some one else that they might be found in another place which was larger and in which the letters were larger. If they were the same, and he could read the larger letters first and then proceed to the lesser, this would have been thought a rare piece of good fortune. Very true, said Adeimantus. But how does the illustration apply to your inquiry? Honestly, I'm asking the same question. I'm interested to see how he's going to apply this example of a short-sighted person to to justice? Do you have any ideas or any predictions, Caleb?
Hmm. Not very specifically. It does bring to mind a little diagram, like a kind of comic picture I saw, where it was like um, equality versus equity or something. It was like equality. It was like three kids of different heights trying to look over a fence to like see a ball game or something. And the equality was each one got a box, and then like only one of them was tall enough to look over. And then equity was like the boxes were arranged more under the short person and less under the tall people. So then all three got to see over. And I mean that's an ongoing topic of huge proportion for societies and governments' welfare and justice, and how to operate for the greatest good of people. But I think for this, they might tie in, I guess, some aspect of opportunity or fairness or something of what they offer to others. But I don't know. I guess I'll read and we'll see. Yes, I will tell you, I replied. Justice, which is the subject of our enquiry, is, as you know, sometimes spoken of as the virtue of an individual, and sometimes as the virtue of a state. True, he replied. And is not a state larger than an individual? It is. Then in the larger the quantity of justice is likely to be larger and more easily discernible. I propose, therefore, that we inquire into the nature of justice and injustice, first as they appear in the state, and secondly in the individual, proceeding from the greater to the lesser and comparing them. That is, he said, an excellent proposal. And if we imagine the state in process of creation, we shall see the justice and injustice of the state in process of creation also. I dare say. When the state is completed, there may be a hope that the object of our search will be more easily discovered. Yes, far more easily. But ought we to attempt to construct one? I said, for to do so, as I am inclined to think, will be a very serious task. Reflect, therefore. I have reflected, said Adeimantus, and am anxious that you should proceed. A state, I said, arises, as I conceive, out of the needs of mankind. No one is self-sufficing, but all of us have many wants. Can any other origin of a state be imagined? There can be no other. Then, as we have many wants, and many persons are needed to supply them, one takes a helper for one purpose and another for another. And when these partners and helpers are gathered together in one habitation, the body of inhabitants is termed a state. True, he said. And they exchange with one another, and one gives and another receives, under the idea that the exchange will be for their good. Very true. Then, I said, let us begin and create in idea a state. And yet the true creator is necessity, who is the mother of our invention. Of course, he replied. Now the first and greatest of necessities is food, which is the condition of life and existence. Certainly. The second is a dwelling, and the third clothing, and the like. True. And now let us see how our city will be able to supply this great demand. We may suppose that one man is a husbandman, another a builder, someone else a weaver. Shall we add to them a shoemaker, or perhaps some other purveyor to our bodily wants? Quite right. The barest notion of a state must include 4 or 5 men. Clearly. And how will they proceed? Will each bring the result of his labors into a common stock? The individual husbandman, for example, producing for 4 and laboring 4 times as long and as much as he needs in the provision of food with which he supplies others as well as himself. Or will he have nothing to do with others and not be at the trouble of producing for them, but provide for himself alone a fourth of the food in a fourth of the time, and in the remaining 3/4 of his time be employed in making a house, or a coat, or a pair of shoes, having no partnership with others, but supplying himself all his own wants? Adeimantus thought that he should aim at producing food only and not at producing everything. So yeah, that's an interesting proposal, I guess. The idea at the extreme, I suppose it's sort of like socialism or communism, the idea of the collective collective uh, good system. But I'd say that's also pretty foundational to the whole idea of the state, as they are saying, and also the idea of specialization as a very useful net good for production. So yeah, I don't know. That was pretty interesting. It's good.
Because on the other hand, without specialization, there would be everyone supplying their own needs in every or for their own need in every respect.
Yeah, which I mean, he already said was, I don't know how he said it, but it was like not possible or not realistic. Hmm. Well, would you like to continue, and we'll see, I guess, how they develop the idea?
For sure, I can continue reading. Probably, I replied. That would be a better way. And when I hear you say this, I am myself reminded that we are not alike. There are diversities of natures among us which are adapted to different occupations. Very true. And will you have a work better done when the workman has many occupations, or when he only has one? When he only has one. Further, there can be no doubt that a work is spoiled when not done at the right time. No doubt, for business is not disposed to wait until the doer of the business is at leisure. But the doer must follow up what he is doing and make the business his first object. He must. And if so, we must infer that all things are produced more plentifully and easily, and of a better quality, when one man does one thing which is natural to him, and does it at the right time, and leaves no other and leaves other things. Undoubtedly, then more than 4 citizens will be required, for the husbandman will not make his own plough from mattock or other implements of agriculture if they're to be good for anything. Neither will the builder make his tools, and he too needs many, and in like manner the weaver and the shoemaker. True. Then carpenters and smiths and many other artisans will be sharers in our little state, which is already beginning to grow. True. Yet, even if we add the neithereds, shepherds, and other herdsmen, in order that a husbandman may have oxen to plow with, and builders as well as husbandmen may have draft cattle, and couriers and weavers and fleeces and hides, still our state will not be very large. This is true, yet neither will it be a very small state which contains all these. Then, again, there is a situation in the city. To find a place where nothing need be imported is well nigh impossible. This I guess this phenomenon kind of came to mind a while back when I was trying to, I guess, perform my own thought experiment of a civilization of this nature, and I feel like there has to be some sort of competitive nature that that supplements something like this in order for it to have any sort of I guess chance of thriving or surviving for a very long time.
Well, it's interesting that you say that, because what came to mind for me was a civilization that I heard about that I guess they used to be more of one civilization or like one large group, and they kind of branched off into two groups. And one of them was more isolationist, and the other one had a lot more exposure to other, societies. And so they were both large enough that they could survive. They had all the physical needs, like large enough that they didn't need anything imported, basically. But then the ones that were more isolationist didn't really advance over the next, several centuries or however long it was. Whereas the other group, because they had trade and they had exposure to other ideas, did flourish and advance. So I think it's sort of interesting. It's not just a one line. There's not like one defining borderline of how big, or how advanced a society needs to be. Like there could be some where you don't need certain things imported, or you don't seem to need anything imported, but maybe it's a little more relative than that. Like a lot of countries could survive without importing anything, but they would be limited from certain kinds of products, things that they can't get in their area. A landlocked country wouldn't get seafood, or some country wouldn't be able to make electronics because they don't have the right minerals in their country and stuff like that. So it is interesting, though. They were pretty ready to say it's just impossible, because I guess they were probably a lot more conscientious than most modern people of. Well, maybe I shouldn't say that. I don't pretend to know all modern people, but they were very conscientious of the importance of imports and trade.
Which I think the opposite extreme could also be detrimental. That of, I guess, like complete reliance on other
Oh,
places
yeah.
for certain things.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like for fear of getting way too off topic, and this feeds into the stereotype of men think of the Roman Empire. Like, not a day goes by that men don't think about the Roman Empire, you know. But one of the, or I remember reading that one of the factors that led to the fall of Rome was this, I guess, excessive expansion in a way, and not being able to account for uh, like who is Roman and who's not, even though like Italy itself is a, I guess, objective boundary. But yeah, does that make sense?
Like citizenship was hard to track.
Yeah, and because of that, it it made uh, things things complicated from a legislative perspective.
Hmm. Well, I would not know about that. Hmm. Well, shall we continue?
For sure.
Yes. Place where nothing need be imported is well nigh impossible. Impossible. Then there must be another class of citizens who will bring the required supply from another city. There must. But if the trader goes empty-handed, having nothing which they require who would supply his need, he will come back empty-handed. That is certain. And therefore what they produce at home must be not only enough for themselves, but such both in quantity and quality as to accommodate those from whom their wants are supplied. Very true. Then more husbandmen and more artisans will be required? They will. Not to mention the importers and exporters, who are called merchants. Yes. Then we shall want merchants. We shall. And if merchandise is to be carried over the sea, skillful sailors will also be needed, and in considerable numbers. Yes, in considerable numbers. Then again, within the city, how will they exchange their productions? To secure such an exchange was, as you will remember, one of our principal objects when we formed them into a society and constituted a state. Clearly, they will buy and sell. Then they will need a marketplace and a money token for purposes of exchange. Certainly. Suppose now that a husbandman or an artisan brings some production to market, and he comes at a time when there is no one to exchange with him. Is he to leave his calling and sit idle in the marketplace? Not at all. He will find people there who, seeing the want, undertake the office of salesmen. In well-ordered states, they are commonly those who are the weakest in bodily strength, and therefore of little use for other purpose. Their duty is to be in the market, and to give money in exchange for goods to those who desire to sell, and to take money from those who desire to buy. This want, then, creates a class of retail traders in our state. Is not retailer the term which is applied to those who sit in the marketplace engaged in buying and selling, while those who wander from one city to another are called merchants? Yes, he said. And there is another class of servants, who are intellectually hardly on the level of companionship. Still they have plenty of bodily strength for labor, which accordingly they sell, and are called, if I do not mistake, hirelings. Hire being the name by which is given to the price of their labor. True. Then hirelings will help to make up our population? Yes. And now, Adamantus, is our state matured and perfected? I think so. Where then is justice, and where is injustice, and in what part of the state did they spring up? Probably in the dealings of these citizens with one another. I cannot imagine that they are more likely to be found anywhere else. I dare say that you are right in your suggestion, I said. We had better think the matter out and not shrink from the enquiry. Let us then consider, first of all, what will be their way of life, now that we have thus established them. Will they not produce corn and wine and clothes and shoes and build houses for themselves? And when they are housed, they will work in summer commonly, stripped and barefoot, but in winter substantially clothed and shod. They will feed on barley meal and flour of wheat, baking and kneading them, making noble cakes and loaves. These they will serve up on a mat of reeds or on clean leaves, themselves reclining the while upon beds strewn with yew or myrtle. And they and their children will feast, drinking of the wine which they have made, wearing garlands on their heads, and hymning the praises of the gods, in happy converse with one another. And they will take care of their families, and they will take care that their families do not exceed their means, having an eye to poverty or war. But, said Glaucon, interposing, you have not given them a relish to their meal. True, I replied, I had forgotten. Of course they must have a relish, salt and olives and cheese, and they will boil roots and herbs, such as country people prepare. For dessert we shall give them figs and peas and beans, and they will roast myrtle berries and acorns at the fire, drinking in moderation. And with such a diet they may be expected to live in peace and health to a good old age, and bequeath a similar life to their children after them. Yes, Socrates, he said, and if you were providing for a city of pigs, how else would you feed the beasts? But what would you have, Glaucon? I replied. So, I think that's a pretty good description. The city develops, people have a lot more roles that need to be filled. I think that was a fun little detail of how they describe the need for retailers. And That kind of gave a little picture of how their society worked. And yeah, that's the simple life, I guess.
I definitely got a lot of sentiments of like living within one's means,
Mm-hmm.
like the comment which I have highlighted on the screen: drinking in moderation, or uh, having an eye to poverty or war.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is kind of getting into the section which many have sort of um, critiqued. Uh,
Hmm. I mean, I imagine they didn't have as much choice back then to not exceed their means. I mean, nowadays I feel like we have a much stronger economy, generally speaking, worldwide. But also we have a little bit more developed economics. We have advanced banking systems, which they didn't talk about here. I imagine something like a bank existed back then, but they had opportunities for lending and borrowing in more advanced ways. And uh, I feel like back then, you could only put so much on your tab and you could only borrow so much. And I'm guessing, it would be hard to kind of live that far beyond your means because everyone would be kind of watching out for their own livelihood and welfare. But they do bring it up, so I guess it is still a concern on their radar or something to think about.
yeah, and I think much of where the, I guess, criticism lies is in who enforces what the what that similar life to their children is, um making sure, or like what making sure that their families do not exceed their means, um and like who, again, I think the criticism lies in like who makes that call of what the of like who makes that call, uh
Yeah, I'm curious to see how they'll transition more into justice and injustice. Also, I thought when they first brought up the idea of looking at justice and injustice from the state level and then applying it to the person level, I thought it would be just sort of looking at the state in the same way they have been talking about it. But instead, he sort of started at the individual level and built up the idea of the state. So now, when they think about the state later in their discussion, I imagine it'll be a lot easier to trace it back down to the individual because they have this idea of the state as a collection of individuals. They've kind of set that groundwork for like considering the individual because the whole state is made out of them. So I don't know. I thought that was very cool. I was kind of curious how they would transition from the state to the individual because I imagine there's some things that wouldn't really necessarily translate between those two scales. So I really liked how they did this whole description.
and along those lines too, many societies uh, throughout history and even today see the family as kind of the fundamental unit of a society. So I think it's interesting that you mentioned that this I guess this paradigm of starting from an individual uh, with a profession and then scaling out from the individual instead of the other way around. maybe from like the state level down to the individual.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think
Well,
it's
I
interesting that
like
you
I
mentioned.
like. Oh yeah. Oh
I, I, I
yeah.
was just gonna
I
say,
think
yeah.
that's. Sorry. I think there might be a little lag. Go ahead.
No, no, that was all of my thought really. I just
Uh,
yeah. Go ahead. I
yeah.
didn't have
I
anything
think
else to say.
also like the idea of the family as a basic unit. Part of that might be because in some way it's sort of like the most primitive, the most primitive state-like structure that you can build on. Because in families, there's also specialized roles. Traditionally, um, and I think biologically we're wired more for certain roles. The father is the defender of the home. It's his duty and his responsibility to protect the family and take care of them. And the mother does the homemaking, raises the children, instills the right values in them. He does a lot of cleaning and preparation and the making of a lot of the house goods. It's a lot of responsibility there. And then of course children, um, I imagine, would help with a lot of similar tasks as much as they could due to their age. And then like just from there, like it's not quite enough for probably a stable state for the most part. I mean, you could probably get food, housing, and clothing. Um, you could have one family living alone and get by, I'm sure. But then that's just sort of the most primitive state-like structure, and then from there, you get more advanced states, like they described, more roles, and you can have a much better economic system.
And when he started talking about considering the state, I was thinking, and I'd be curious to say or to see what he has to say about looking at the state from a legislative or a judicial or an executive point of view, to use, I guess, uh, United States of America f- familiar terms.
Yeah, like formal government as opposed to
Yeah,
just yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah,
Well,
as opposed to yeah.
yeah, just a collection of people working together.
Hmm.
Yeah. Well, let's keep reading. And I think by the time we wrap up this arc of the conversation, um it'll probably be about time to wrap up. So let's see what they say.
For sure. But what would you have, Glaucon? I replied. Why, he said, you should give them the ordinary conveniences of life. People who are to be comfortable are accustomed to lie on sofas and dine off tables, and they should have sauces and sweets in the modern style. Yes, I said, now I understand. The question which you would have me consider is not only how a state, but how a luxurious state is created. And possibly there is no harm in this, for in such a state we shall be more likely to see how justice and injustice originate. In my opinion, the true and healthy constitution of the state is the one which I have described. But if you wish to also see a state at fever heat, I have no objection, for I suspect that many will not be satisfied with the simpler way of life. They will be for adding sofas and tables and other furnitures and dainties and perfumes and incense and courtesans and cakes, all these not of one sort only, but in every variety. We must go beyond the necessities of which I was at first speaking, such as houses and clothes and shoes. The arts of the painter and the embroiderer will have to be set in motion, and gold and ivory and all sorts of materials must be procured. True, he said. Then we must enlarge our borders, for the original healthy state is no longer sufficient. Now will the city have to fill and swell with a multitude of callings which are not required by any natural want, such as the whole tribe of hunters and actors, whom one large class have to do with forms and colors. Another will be the votaries of music, poets and their attendant trains of rhapsodists, players, dancers, contractors, also makers of diverse kinds of articles, including women's dresses, and we shall want more servants. Will not tutors also be in request, and nurses wet and dry, tire women and barbers, as well as confectioners and cooks, and swineherders too, who were not needed and therefore had no place in the former edition of our state, but are needed now. They must not be forgotten, and there will be animals of many other kinds if people eat them, certainly. And living in this way, we shall have much greater need of physicians than before. Uh, just as an aside, I think that's uh, an astute point. Uh, with this, uh, with this excess, with excess comes, I guess, a lack of, uh, I guess, awareness or consideration for moderation, as you were saying, and so uh, whether that is in like a physical or a dietary sense, and so I think it's interesting, just as an aside, that he mentions that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting that he mentions that after all these things of expanding and kind of living beyond just the basics. Like, I wonder if it's more like the food or maybe the dangerous, exotic collecting jobs, collecting different resources, or the raising of different animals, or like what exactly might lead to the need of a greater need of physicians. But yeah, certainly, I think, if only for all the more complicating factors of life, it would make sense. If people want running water, then you install lead pipes, and suddenly you need more physicians.
I understood that reference. To quote Captain America. Uh, I'll just read up until this. I I guess maybe 4 or 5 more uh, chapter breaks or paragraph breaks.
Okay.
He goes on to say, much greater, and the country which was not enough to support the original inhabitants will be too small now, and not enough. Quite true. Then a slice of our neighbor's land will be wanted by us for pasture and tillage, and they will want a slice of ours if, like ourselves, they exceed the limit of necessity and give themselves up to the unlimited accumulation of wealth. That, Socrates, will be inevitable. And so we shall go to war, Glaucon, shall we not? Most certainly, he replied. Then, without determining yet, as yet, whether war does good or harm, this much we may affirm, that now we have discovered war to be derived from causes which are also the causes of almost all the evils in states, private as well as public. Undoubtedly. Um, and in our state, once more enlarge, and this time the enlargement will be nothing short of a whole army, which will have to go out and fight with the invaders for all that we have, as well as for all the things and persons whom we were describing above. Hmm.
Yeah, it's interesting how they say that war is derived from the causes which are also the causes of almost all the evils in the states. So they haven't really discussed it yet, but they seem to believe that all these things of a developing state, or perhaps more specifically, the expansionary aspects, the living beyond the basics, is perhaps the cause of almost all the evils.
Oh, sorry, I think I muted my microphone. I think it's also interesting this he seems to not be considering, I guess, internal expansion. If you catch my drift, um, that if there's a society, logically it would need or necessarily grow without having to uh, bring in outsiders. Um, and so I think it's interesting that he is, I guess, making this case that uh, in the case of, I guess, as he would probably put it, rampant excess, there would be some need for uh, working with neighboring states and, I guess, accruing their resources as well, in addition to what one has in their own state.
Yeah, it is interesting. They seem to kind of brush over, um, like the necessary need for war. Like previously, they acknowledged that they needed things from outside their society, and so they were like, "Oh, you need merchants. You need people to travel and ship, and you need sailors." But I guess there's sort of an implied assumption that you need war to claim land. Like goods you can trade, but land you have to fight for, which is interesting.
And that could be a, I guess, a misconception of my own, that uh, I guess I wasn't really considering the aspect of war being specifically a land amassing tool,
Yeah.
in so much as just a, uh, a tool for amassing goods. Like, I guess a counterpoint to what I was originally considering was maybe war is unnecessary if, like, I guess education is possible. Like, how to, like, you don't need to go to war to bring in a confectioner or a baker. You can just teach John and Jane Doe how to become bakers, and how to teach other people to become bakers.
Yeah,
Like,
and
it
you can just
doesn't
you can
necessitate.
trade for it, you can teach. Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't necessitate like full blown conflict.
hmm Well, they did introduce it by the need for pasture and tillage. So, like, you need the pasture land, you need farmland, and so that is kind of the driver of it. And I do think that kind of makes sense that land would be treated differently than other like goods, because goods can be freely, moved about. Their ownership is temporary. It has nothing to do with necessarily the security of the state. Whereas normally land is more of a permanent possession of the state that is seen as essential to its security. So it's, you have to change the borders of your land if you like give up a chunk. It's part of the state structure, or at least that's how it's thought of, much more than like just some possession. So I do feel like maybe there's reasoning beyond just that's how it is, so that's what they assume. But they don't really go into that reasoning, so it's an interesting topic, I think.
Cool. shall I continue, or would you like to take a turn?
Yeah, I can take a turn. Let's see, and we finished off at Y. And then looks like this kind of goes on for a while, so we'll start looking for a point to wrap up.
For sure.
So the whole army has to find her. Why, he said, are they not capable of defending themselves? No, I said, not if we were right in the principle which was acknowledged by all of us when we were framing the state. The principle, as you will remember, was that one man cannot practice many arts with success. Very true, he said. But is not war an art? Certainly. And an art requiring as much attention as shoemaking? Quite true. And the shoemaker was not allowed by us to be a husbandman or a weaver or a builder, in order that we might have our shoes well made. But to him and to every other worker was assigned one work for which he was by nature fitted, and at that he was to continue working all his life long and at no other. He was not to let opportunities slip, and then he would become a good workman. Now, nothing can be more important than that the work of a soldier should be well done. But is war an art so easily acquired that a man may be a warrior who is also a husbandman or shoemaker or other artisan? Although no one in the world would be a good dice or draught player who merely took up the game as a recreation and had not from his earliest years devoted himself to this and nothing else. No tools will make a man a skilled workman or master of defense, nor be of any use to him who has not learned how to handle them and has never bestowed any attention upon them. How then will he who takes up a shield or other implement of war become a good fighter all in a day, whether with heavy armed or any other kind of troops? Yes, he said, the tools which would teach men their own use would be beyond price. And the higher the duties of the guardian, I said, the more time and skill and art and application will be needed by him. No doubt, he replied. Will he not also require natural aptitude for his calling? Certainly. Then it will be our duty to select, if we can, natures which are fitted for the task of guarding the city. It will. And the selection will be no easy matter, I said, but we must be brave and do our best. We must. Is not the noble youth very like a well-bred dog in respect of guarding and watching? What do you mean? I mean that both of them ought to be quick to see and swift to overtake the enemy when they see him, and strong too. When they have caught him, they have to fight with him. All these qualities, he replied, will certainly be required by them. Well, and your guardian must be brave if he is to fight well. Certainly. And is he likely to be brave who has no spirit, whether horse or dog or any other animal? Have you never observed how invincible and unconquerable is spirit, and how the presence of it makes the soul of any creature to be absolutely fearless and indomitable? I have. Then now we have a clear notion of the bodily qualities which are required in the guardian. True. And also the mental ones. His soul is to be full of spirit? Yes. But are not these spirited natures apt to be savage with one another and with everybody else? A difficulty by no means easy to overcome, he replied. Whereas, I said, they ought to be dangerous to their enemies and gentle to their friends. If not, they will destroy themselves without waiting for their enemies to destroy them. True, he said. What is to be done then? I said. How shall we find a gentle nature which has also a great spirit? For the one is the contradiction of the other. True. He will not be a good guardian who is wanting in either of these two qualities, and yet the combination of them appears to be impossible. And hence we must infer that to be a good guardian is impossible. I'm afraid that what you say is true, he replied. Here, feeling perplexed, I began to think over what had preceded. My friend, I said, no wonder that we are in a perplexity. for we have lost sight of the image which we had before us. What do you mean? He said. I mean to say that there do exist natures gifted with those opposite qualities. And where do you find them? Many animals, I replied, furnish examples of them. Our friend the dog is a very good one. You know that well-bred dogs are perfectly gentle to their familiars and acquaintances, and the reverse to strangers? Yes, I know. Then there is nothing impossible or out of the order of nature in our finding a guardian who has a similar combination of qualities. Certainly not. Would not he who is fitted to be a guardian, besides the spirited nature, need to have the qualities of a philosopher? I do not apprehend your meaning. The trait of which I am speaking, I replied, may be also seen in the dog, and is remarkable in the animal. What trait? Why, a dog, whenever he sees a stranger, is angry. When an acquaintance, he welcomes him, although the one has never done him any harm, nor the other any good. Did this never strike you as curious? The matter never struck me before, but I quite recognize the truth of your remark. And surely this instinct of the dog is very charming. Your dog is a true philosopher. Why? Why? Because he distinguishes the face of a friend and of an enemy only by the criterion of knowing and not knowing. And must not an animal be a lover of learning who determines what he likes and dislikes by the test of knowledge and ignorance? Most assuredly. And is not the love of learning the love of wisdom, which is philosophy? They are the same, he replied. And may we not say confidently of a man, also, that he who is likely to be gentle to his friends and acquaintances must by nature be a lover of wisdom and knowledge? That we may safely affirm. Then he who is to be a really good and noble guardian of the state will require to unite in himself philosophy and spirit and swiftness and strength. Undoubtedly. Then we have found the desired natures, and now that we have found them, how are they to be reared and educated? Is not this an inquiry which may be expected to throw light on the greater inquiry, which is our final end? How do justice and injustice grow up in states? For we do not want either to omit what is to the point, or to draw out the argument to an inconvenient length. And that's probably a pretty good place to wrap up. They're transitioning full circle now, so.
Yeah, I think this, knowing what I know of this book, I think this is when they start talking about philosopher kings.
Could be. That would be interesting. Yeah, that makes sense. Well, that was a fun little excursion through the idea that dogs are philosophers because they make judgments based on what they know.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to. I want to put your dog is a true philosopher in the thumbnail. I think that would be funny.
Yeah, that's definitely a clippable line.
Awesome.
Yeah. So I guess having the attention and discernment to know things and to recognize the value in knowing things and to sort of have a preference for knowledge is all it takes to love knowledge, to love wisdom, and to be a philosopher. Nice. Well, thank you all for joining us today. This was a fun read. We're continuing on through book 2. Looks like we might even finish it up next time, depending on how quick we read. And we're glad to have you. Fun time.
Thanks for joining us through today's exploration. If this resonated with you, please subscribe, like the video, and hit the bell so you never miss an episode. Check the description and pinned comment for extra resources. Thanks again for being here, and we'll see you in the next one.